So I went over why I like the default bevel so much. However, you can just make a selection, and if you press Ctrl B, you can get something like this, or roll the wheel to get segments like this. However, if we look at the very bottom of the screen, we see that we're able to basically roll the wheel to adjust the segments, but we're also able to press P to trigger changing the profile. So from here, we see that I'm able to change the profile while inside of bevel. And we also see that pressing the hotkey of A will allow me to go back to adjusting the width, which is what I'm used to. So now I am drawing what's called a profile bevel. And so this is basically the bevel from now on. And I refer to this as full length bevel. But now from this point on, whenever I grab an edge and perform a bevel, we see that the profile is preserved, but edges are being added to it to protect the boundary. And this is a main component in my work when it comes to subdivision conversion, because it allows for me to preserve what's important while also adding what's needed in order to basically protect the perimeter whenever it comes to that conversion process. So sometimes you can get in and do these things manually and actually manage it via an inset, but here I'm actually just showing how I'm able to just select these edges and begin beveling them, and eventually I knew that doubles was going to catch up with me. So if we just merge by distance, we see that we're fine. However, we raise it a little bit, we see that we can be a little bit more than fine. So with a few supplemental edges and just added to this, we have basically protected this area enough for it to survive subdivision. And this behavior is extremely destructive. We're just talking about a one-way trip, and that trip is away to subdivision. Here we're just making some selections, filling in some loose ends. For this area, this was our initial point, so let's just press G, and we can press Y in order to constrain it to Y. And since we're under vertex snapping with Control Shift Tab, we can just snap it to here, and then we can do the same with this, bring it up, snap it to this area. We can select everything and remove by distance, and then select these two areas and dissolve them. So this area didn't quite clean up, so if we really want it to be OCD, we can just grab this whole loop SC0 in order to just flatten it out. But because of what we've done with this, we can now press Control number and begin subdividing it, and we see that our work is still not done. So let's just merge that, delete this edge. Always a sneaky little vert in there. But just like that, we performed a basic subdivision conversion on this cube. And I mean, we could have just selected the whole cube and then pressed Control B, and it just would have been short work. So I just took it the long way. But if we look at this in a more extended sense of using it, let's perform a cut with Boxcutter and perform another cut. And let's just Control A, visual geometry to mesh. We can actually select everything and just press Control B in order to protect this. The interesting thing about bevel, whenever you use it in edit mode, is you can press F9 and bring up the parameters for adjusting it post operation. So we can still get in here and adjust our sections or our segments. We can adjust our profile, which they call shape at this point, which I always find a little weird. Sometimes I'll bring this back up and set things back to 0.5, which is good. But most importantly, we could talk about our miters. So by setting this to a miter of arc, we see that we're getting something a little bit more reasonable with our corners, and we can press F9 to bring the window back up. So if I hold shift and I move this gradually, we see that we're able to adjust this and just get a better result. However, we can also deal with the other miters, which is the inner, and change that to arc, which always gives me unsatisfactory results. However, I'm sure there's just something you can do with the settings to actually get it to be something a little bit more agreeable like this. If we wanted, I suppose, to have poles happening at all of our endings. Let's see what the alternative was with sharp. That's something that I'm a little bit more trustworthy of, versus actually having very sharp poles happening in all of my corners. But I'm in an adventurous mood. We will give it a try and see what our results are, continuing on in this example. So the rest of the stuff, I suppose, is there if you need it. I mean, it's basically the same stuff that you would see inside the bevel modifier, but just going over it in the context of the work at hand. So from here, if we press Alt V and we look at the wireframe to mesh, this is what we're looking at. Kind of reminds me of Mario with all this plumber pipe happening in all the junction areas. Kind of not optimal. It's really triggering my vision. But let's just press Q. with the mesh selected, and under add modifier we can add a triangulate. So from here we've added a triangulate modifier to the mesh that we beveled manually, which will basically add geometry to fill in the blanks. And with this we can just select the geometry and press Control 2 or Control 3 in order to add 2 layers of subdivision. If we press Alt V and don't look at the wireframe for a moment, we see that this mesh has survived subdivision, and we did very minimal work in order to get it to this phase. So this is really the foundation of surviving subdivision. In fact, let's duplicate this off to the side, maybe on the x-axis with Shift D, and let's apply the triangulate. And in edit mode, let's press Alt J just to see what we're looking like with quads, and that didn't work out as fluidly as I thought it would. In fact, seeing this edge move over so far is just tragic. I mean, we could go in edit mode and begin making these connections with J. However, that's outside the scope of this video. But just like that, we were able to survive subdivision. However, having a miter of arc on enter, I'm just not going to be with that. But I believe that expresses the point of Bevel's basic use with subdivision in edit mode.